Ranking of Kings is a lot of things: hopeful, wholesome, charming, exploratory, but most surprisingly, incredibly dark in its history and its characters. But it's that very darkness that I believe is exactly why its happy ending, despite its flaws, carries so much more weight than it would have without the trauma, the death, and the horror that the greatest protagonist of the season, Bojji, had to face. Let me explain. From the moment of the second episode, where we face the death of Kage's mother and the parading of his clan's corpses by their murderers, it was clear Ranking of Kings was not going to always be the cheery show its art style suggested. And boy, is that an understatement. Fratricide, genocide, patricide, atrocities, possession, betrayal, grievous injuries, the peril of war and immortality, and the cruelty of humankind are all incredibly prevalent in this show about a deaf grunting boy. But they fit so well because of a little thing called juxtaposition and a fledgling paragon. Bojji is, for all intents and purposes, a paragon. He's dangerously optimistic, all around forgiving and happy, but also capable. It takes a close and trusted friend of his attempt to murder him for Bojji to actually feel anything resembling hate or anger, and even then, those are fleeting emotions for him. And while Bojji changes, he grows stronger, more confident, more capable. His goodness and his willingness to see past the outward appearances of others, that same trait that so many never gave him, allows Bojji to not only stay his innocent self, but also to grow incredibly strong. He is in every way a pacifist fighter, from his dodging to his non-lethal swordsmanship and his vehement refusal to kill anyone, even the one who orchestrated his mother's death. And this is not, in my opinion, a weakness of his, but the unyielding strength of his empathy. Bojji never truly falters, but the world around him does. It's clear from the world building and subtle hints dropped throughout the show that the world of Ranking of Kings is a cruel and dark place, or at least it was not long ago. Gods like Saturn and the Three-Eyed One ruled and killed with impunity, and those that were able to defeat them relied on terrible tactics and deals that were heinous and still haunt them years later. The Underworld brothers justifying torturing and killing a child to win a war that, if they lose, will cause pain and suffering for a civilization of people with no end in sight. Boss, a murderer in his own right, using the power of a devil, which corrupts the devil even more, to kill a god. And the ranking system itself, born out of fear of monsters or maybe gods that rule the world, making kings out of those who can promise survival from them. And yet, even then, something else sinister lurks behind that system, as it leads to the madness of its number one ranked king more often than not. A madness that will likely plague the Underworld King Desha in his last resort chance to save his immortal brother Oaken, who went mad after gaining those powers of immortality, unable to die or feel emotion except when he causes pain to others. There's a separation here between Bojji and that kind of hopelessly dark world. Now, it's not a clear separation. Bojji still faces his series of challenges in darkness too. Much like Kage, he bears witness to the death of his mother, standing in a pool of her blood as she's impaled by siege arrows trying to protect him, begging for their lives. Bojji, though naive at times, is not clueless as to how terrible someone like Miranjo is, or how cruel the world can be. But unlike many other shows and unlike many other characters, Ranking of Kings understands that cruelty and trauma doesn't need to be all there is to a person, or all of their story. And when a show goes through so much effort to explain context, to give reason to actions, but not necessarily excuse them, that gives Bojji and our own forgiveness so much more weight. And so let's go to the real topic of this review: Miranjo and the ending, the inciting villain of all of Bojji's trauma and trouble. Why he's physically weak, why his mother died, and why his brother tried to kill him. And how the show goes about explaining the greater question of why. I'm not going to go in depth about her background exactly, or her past. You should watch the show for that, to be honest. But regardless, Miranjo faced terrible cruelty, and then was enabled by Boss, who felt terrible for her and incredibly guilty, as he both killed her father and after becoming her surrogate protector, left her to the whims of people who mutilated her. And after that mutilation, he murdered the entire village. Her obsession and her trauma, and the emotions she lost, possibly in a literal deal with the devil, led her to not concern about others' feelings. Only Boss, and the two became selfish for each other, doing whatever would bring the other, quote-unquote, happiness. Of course, this didn't bring anyone a real happiness in the long term, only more death, sadness, and terror. And in the end of it all, knowing her past, Miranjo seeing herself in Kage, both with their mothers being betrayed and killed before them, and coming to grips with the real consequences of her actions, Miranjo starts feeling empathy, and starts coming to grips with how terrible a person she is. And truly, despite how I couldn't, as a passive viewer, forgive her necessarily for everything she did, seeing her in the belly of the demon, feasting on the souls of others and then throwing them up and eating them again, and the absolute terror on her face, I felt pity for her. I can't say I would have made the same choices that Bojji and Despa did in the end, but that's not my decision. It's Bojji's and Despa's. And to be honest, Bojji forgiving her, after seeing her truly remorseful for what she's done, makes sense, as much as she might not be deserving of that forgiveness. But in facing cruelty and darkness, Bojji has earned the right to forgive should he choose. And from everything we've seen Bojji's character do, I think it would have been a far worse ending had he not forgiven her, let alone killed her. I do appreciate, though, how even those who've made those terrible mistakes are shown to be remorseful at the end. I think it would have been much harder to forgive them had they not. Except maybe Boss, but we'll talk about that at the end. And they seem to be wanting to do what they can to make up for them, Miranjo pledging to make the entire kingdom happy. From the four fighting an impossible battle to keep Bojji safe, to Hilling showing affection, and Didus abandoning the throne. Incredible darkness can only be beaten by incredible compassion. And it's clear Bojji's greatest achievement was breaking that cycle of trauma, going from being an outcasted and hated at the beginning of series to forgiving the wrongs against him with a smile on his face. That led so many others finding new hope within themselves. The world of Ranking of Kings will be a bit brighter in the end someday. So that was my bit of a rambled review of the ending of Ranking of Kings. I will have to admit that I did have some issues with it, and I've seen criticism of it online, and I agree, a decent amount of it is warranted, but I still think that for everything that happened, and compared to some other shows' ending, I do think it was a pretty nice and optimistic ending. I think it would be better if we had a season 2 of some sort that helped explain some things, helped show real context for what those people who needed to atone for what they've done, seeing them actually make progress or doing good things, showing that they can be good, I think could help a lot. But whether or not we get a season 2, I don't know. I'm just still happy I watched this show. And I think the biggest controversies being the parallels with, I believe it was South Korea, and the townsman who turned on Miranjo's family. I do understand that's problematic, but I don't know enough about the context of it, nor do I know the author's intention enough to pass full judgment on that. And I think it's interesting looking at the two main villains of the show, Miranjo and Boss. I think at the end, you could probably blame Boss more for everything that went on, because Miranjo was traumatized as a child. She needed somebody who would have been an adult to set her on a better path. And Boss not only helped to traumatize her, but then ended up enabling all of her actions with an undying loyalty, because he felt incredibly guilty for all the terrible things that happened to her. And it's understandable, but I think at the end, the real villain was Boss, because he was the adult when the entire situation came down, and he didn't do enough to help her, and she went off the deep end. And she still bears responsibility for her actions, don't get me wrong, but I think the moment she killed his wife should have been when he put his foot down and stopped it all, but he didn't. He just enabled her. So that's my idea of the ending. I honestly don't know how much it better could have ended. There's definitely some leftover questions, like what exactly happens to the rank 1 king? What will happen to Oaken now that his head's in a catfish's belly? which sounds like another fairy tale of some sort. But there's definitely questions left and unanswered. But the show ended in a way that it could just end like that. And like I said before, I think I'd be happy if that was the case. I don't know if a second season would make it better. But whatever they end up doing, Ranking of Kings, I still think, while maybe it's not anime of the year, it's definitely probably going to be fantasy of the year if you don't count Attack on Titan as fantasy. I don't know. Attack on Titan's won too many things. I think some other shows deserve a little chance. But yeah, this will be, barring a season 2, my final review of Ranking of Kings. There's other stuff I want to talk about, and I need to give myself a break to work on larger things. So, yeah, this is the spiel where I say like, comment, subscribe if you want, and thank you so much for watching. I'm Locklan, and I'll see you next time. Bye.